Podcast. This platform is for common sense people looking for up-to-date, accurate, and truthful information without the hot garbage corporate media bias. The power of one can lead to the power of many. You never know what small act that you may say or do that may literally change the lives of millions tomorrow. And don't you ever think that you can't make a difference, because you can. Good afternoon, my fellow Michiganders. Good afternoon, my fellow Americans. This is probably one of the most important interviews that I have done. The corruption of what the FBI, what our own government is willing to do to a normal, average person, you're going to discover what they are in this interview. This is Master Sergeant Jeremy Brown. He is a Special Forces operative, a Green Beret, and he was arrested for his role in the January 6th shenanigans, as I'm going to call them, because he has a different story than what was told by the corporate media. He has a different story than what has been told by these corrupt politicians. It is a long interview, but I think it's very important to listen to every single detail, because I have listened to over 6 hours of his interviews. And that's one thing that I've learned, is if you tell a lie long enough, people will start to believe that it's true. And that's what we have seen on the corporate media and what they're constantly trying to put out of what happened on January 6th. But I also know this: if you know the truth and you just tell the truth, then you don't have to remember the truth. And after listening to hours and hours of footage of this guy getting interviewed, his story is the same. I have not found any discrepancies in anything that he has said. So it leads me to believe that he is telling the truth. So as you listen, open up your mind, open up your heart, and listen to what this guy has to say, because I think it's very important. And I'm going to be quite honest with every single one of you, that after listening to him, I'm scared. I'm scared for my children. I'm scared for our grandchildren. I'm scared for this little idea of America, but it's because of people like him who are willing to put their lives on the line, who are willing to stand for this little idea called America, who are willing to sit in jail for all of you so you can have a glimpse of what freedom is about. So before I bring Jeremy on, I want to allow you to hear what his statement is so you get to know him before this interview. My name is Jeremy Brown, and I am a 20-year retired U.S. Army Special Forces Sergeant, Master Sergeant, and combat veteran. And my entire 22-year career was spent in the U.S. Special Operations community. Today, I'm a political prisoner of war, illegally held for over 765 days and counting, in maximum security for a long list of fabricated crimes with the intent of punishing me for my real crime, exposing the truth about the FBI's role in the January 6th attack on the American people. An attack by those who seized control of our system of government years ago. We are and have been engaged in an unrestricted, unconventional, and secret war with global forces that seek to destroy America's sovereignty in order to remove America as the final barrier to a global government and world dominance by powerful elites that believe we should serve as subjects at the very best, and at worst, die as the useless human beings that they are publicly described us to be. If you are hearing this message, it is because of the bravery and courage of those bringing it to you. They do so out of love for the truth and humanity itself. I thank them. If you agree with what you hear, if it piques your interest to explore more, if you learn something that wakes you up, or if you are inspired to try to prove me wrong, please learn more about me and my story by visiting his website, JeremyBrownDefense.com. Now, he has a defense fund, and he has a Give, Send, Go account on that website, and I'm going to vow that I am going to donate $500 of my personal money to his defense fund, because we need him to expose everything that has gone on and help all of those who are in prison unjustly by this government. So listen in, be awakened, open your mind, open your heart, and allow this to spark that fire about what being an American is all about. Courage, integrity, and doing the right thing, even if it's hard to do so. Jeremy.
Yes.
You there, buddy? How you doing, man?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. One second. I want to make sure that we're recording this call here so we can get a good show from you here. Man, thank you so much for your time. I have literally listened to 7, 8 hours of your footage, and my goodness gracious, it seems like I'm listening to a Tom Clancy novel or Jack Ryan episode, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, Tom Clancy does get his information from real people.
Yeah, amen to that.
And, it's funny that you should mention that because that's something that we talk about on a regular basis is the predictive programming nature of the Department of Defense relationships with authors, with Hollywood producers and directors and things like that, so that people like yourself, when they hear the truth of the way the world works, you say, that sounds like a movie. So, yeah. It's art imitating life, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, for all my listeners out there, and our reach is about 500,000 right now. I'm still surprised that you're not on Tucker Carlson. I'm hoping that happens here in the near future. Your story is amazing. So, if it's okay, how much time do you have today, Jeremy?
I have as much time as you have. I mean, in fact, the Bureau of Prisons says that I have until December of 2027.
Okay. So what I want to do for the listeners out there, because my goodness gracious, it wasn't until I got a private message from somebody in Florida named Jack that I even heard about you, and it kind of reminded me of a couple of the news articles that I read about you, but that is as far as it went until I start diving into your website, which obviously we're going to include your website in the description of the post that we do and the email list that we send it out to. And when I start listening to the 7 to 10 hours of footage of your story, it was shocking. It really was. It opened my eyes to a lot of things. The FBI came and visited me in early January 2021, and I heard you tell that story too. So, if we can just start from the very beginning with your military experience and how the evolution of January 6th happened, you work in security for the Oath Keepers, and how this all kind of evolved from them, arresting you for 2 misdemeanors for the search warrant for your appeal, everything that you want to cover, my brother. We're here just to get your message and your story out.
And as we're going through this, I'm glad that you've noticed, excuse me, I'm glad that you've noticed, and I'm sure that you've looked on the website, so you see that it's not that I haven't talked to people. It's that no people with large audiences have dared to touch my story. And one of the reasons behind that, I firmly believe and can provide circumstantial evidence of, is that there is an active suppression effort. And I say this because I've had people multiple times that have actually been on Tucker Carlson's show when he was at Fox, that were talking to producers, that were talking to people that they were talking to that got them on there, and they were interested in, and then all of a sudden the interest was lost, right? And so there is an active suppression effort to my story, and for good reason, right? It's the same reason why they never talked about Ray Epps until they couldn't avoid talking about Ray Epps. And then what did? They put him on 60 Minutes. They put him on the stand in front of Congress and all this other stuff. So my effort here, and I appreciate you taking, the risk. I mean, I don't know what's happening to these people. I don't know if they're getting visits. I don't know if they're being told false stories, or maybe they're being told true stories. I mean, I'm not a perfect individual. I mean, I spent 20 years in special forces. We have a reputation with the ladies, and, we make mistakes in our personal lives and things like that. But that doesn't change the reality of what my experience is and what I saw that day and what happened to me and my assessments of what is happening today, which seems to line up with all the evidence that is slowly trickling out. So I definitely appreciate you taking the opportunity. Pastor Jack Martin has been a big supporter of mine here throughout my Florida House of Representatives campaign. And he just visited not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, visited me here in the Citrus County Jail. So I certainly appreciate you taking the time to get this story, because it is a story that the American people need to know about. It should definitely open their eyes, because a recent Epoch Times poll, probably a couple months ago, ran a poll, and they found that 65% of registered voters believe that the government was involved in January 6th. Well, if 65% of American registered voters have a feeling that the government was somehow involved in January 6th, well, imagine what those 65% are going to do when they hear my story about the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force attempting to recruit me and then ignoring me for 10 months after the fact, and then all of a sudden arresting me with planted evidence and convicting me to a jail sentence, and no one in the media talking about it. This is clearly an effort to destroy me, not only by credibility, but also by locking me up on what they claim to be unrelated charges, but yet they're charges of which the evidence in my case before my even trial was utilized against Stuart Rhodes and the other Oath Keepers that were convicted of seditious conspiracy and other conspiracy charges and all the stuff, right? They literally took the evidence from a trial that had not even happened yet, used it in another trial to convict them, and now what they're faced with is the fact that that evidence in my trial is subject to an appeal. And one of the things that we're trying to get out is that if my appeal goes through, which the appeals brief can be read, I think it's posted on my website, if that appeal, which was submitted on October 23rd, if that appeal overturns my conviction, because the government used that exact same evidence in the Oath Keepers trial, in essence, their convictions will also be subject to being overturned. And this is something that the government, I'm sure, is definitely afraid of.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100% there. And, you know, with you mentioning the FBI involvement with January 6th, it kind of rings home to what we dealt with here in Michigan. You know, our movement started back in April 2020. I was one of the first people to stand up against the unconstitutional lockdowns. You know, we'd been deplatformed several times. I grew a group called Michiganders Against Excessive Quarantine, which grew to 400,000 people in 4 weeks. That was taken down. I co-founded an organization called Stand Up Michigan. That was taken down. I just got booted off YouTube for exposing the border crisis several weeks ago with a subscriber base of 250,000. So we are nothing new to the censorship and what they're willing to do. I ran for governor in the state of Michigan, been through all that garbage. Again, it just, your story needs to be told, and we're going to do everything we can to allow our 500,000 person movement to hear this. And that's one thing we learned within our movement is the power of one can lead to the power of many. And who knows what this conversation will lead to.
I want to make the point that you should know firsthand the extent of this corrupt FBI and DOJ's power, because see, you guys had your own individual January 6th.
Yeah,
it was the Governor Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. It was a staged event where the FBI literally fabricated the entire situation and found some unwitting dupes to fill in the roles of the terrorists. And I guarantee you that in your situation, in your interviews and in your struggles with censorship and being deplatformed and trying to shut down your efforts, they have probably tried to tie you to that event. Am I right?
The FBI was at my house.
That's exactly right. And so you know that a lot of those same FBI members, the upper level echelon of leadership, as well as the DOJ prosecutors, they're all the same people that are involved in this January 6th thing. And so in fact, that story is what I jokingly claim to this day that got me arrested, because it was Darren Beatty's reporting in June of 2021 that reignited the interest in my story, because, see, he made the link between the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot and January 6th and some of the crossover and similarities and things like that, which then got people saying, well, wait a minute, didn't we hear about some Green Beret that was also, approached by the FBI? And it was at that very time, and I can track it in my discovery, all the documentation. Up until that point, the FBI had no interest in me at all, except for monitoring what I was saying on social media platforms and interviews, right? It's all in their discovery evidence. And yet, after the Darren Beatty article, that was released on revolver.news. After that, that is when the FBI moved in. They proffered the remaining oath keepers that had not been arrested, and they interrogate and question them about pretty much Stuart Rhodes and me. And it was then that they started to build their investigation in order to conduct their staged arrest of me on September 30th. So there is a very close link between what you've been going through in Michigan and what the rest of America has been going through as it's related to January 6th.
I was reading on your website the unconventional warfare document and stating like where we're at. And it's, to be honest, it kind of scared the hell out of me on where we're at and everything that you kind of related to what's been going on over the past decade at least. And you said this has been happening pretty much as the Constitution's been under attack ever since it was written. And so, like, with your experience, with your training in Special Forces as a Green Beret, I mean, this is what you've trained for.
Well, of course, and it's actually worse than that because I actually retired as the non-commissioned officer in charge of the Special Activities Branch of Special Operations Command Central. Now, what the Special Activities Branch does, the J3X, the Special Activities Branch is a subset portion of the operational aspect of Special Operations Command Central. It is the subset that handles all the special activities programs, all of the super secret programs of which even at times the very commander doesn't know about. We're talking about larger programs that are compartmentalized to the point where sometimes only a handful of individuals are ever even read onto these programs. This is the office for which I work, an office that conducted policy oversight for all covert, clandestine, and compartmentalized operations within the Middle East, right? And so I know exactly how this all works, right? I mean, it was our job. And not only that, but before I took that job, I had 17 years of experience as a special operator at the operational and tactical level. So I have a very unique background to be able to say, yeah, this looks a lot like X, Y, and Z. So we were talking about my military background. So the last 2 years of my military career was as the non-commissioned officer in charge of the J3X, the Special Activities Branch. And like you mentioned at the beginning of this call about how, this sounds like Tom Clancy. Well, the J3X is the area for which all of these Tom Clancy type things are monitored, where policy oversight is provided, where we literally write the policy on how these programs are conducted. And so all of the aspects of the Special Operations Command Central Command that handles military deception or MILDEC, SIG Redux, which is signal reduction, PSYOPs, MESO, unconventional warfare, human intelligence, signals intelligence, the interaction with special mission units, all directly under the National Command Authority, but have to have coordinating efforts with, what we would refer to as white side special operations, right? So you have black side special operations, which are, all the units that don't exist, right? Which are the units that when you see them in the news stories or whatever, everyone falls over themselves to deny that they ever exist. But counter-threat finance, non-standard funding, special access programs, all of these things are handled by the Special Activities Branch, the J3X. And this is the office for which I retired out of. An office that has literally, I think we had 5 people when I retired in it, but most of the time we only had three guys, an officer in charge, a non-commissioned officer in charge, and a deputy. That's how small this office is, but yet we manage all of these things, right? We conduct the policy oversight. And so at trial, the DOD had all kinds of observers at our trial. In fact, there were so many members of the federal government, whether it was FBI, DOJ, or Department of Defense at my trial, that they literally took up half of the courtroom. There were so many members of the government at my trial that there wasn't enough seating for my actual public supporters. Now, remember, I'm the one with the Sixth Amendment right to a public trial. not the government. And yet they feel the seats of bodies in order to prevent people from coming in there and hearing the truth. But they were clearly worried that I might expose something, and so therefore they had people in there. And I'm here to tell the American people that what I am seeing, what I was exposed to through the direct contact with myself, through the Department of Homeland Security's investigators working on behalf of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, and then what I saw on January 6th as juxtaposed against the narrative of what the government is telling people what happened on January 6th, is a clear indication that the United States government, very likely in very tight coordination with the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, which is basically all of these agencies that nobody even knows about, right? Everyone knows about the 18 intelligence agencies, of which half of them are Department of Defense entities, but they don't know about all these sub-agencies or the private military companies that feed these agencies. Nobody knows about that. But yet the Joint Terrorism Task Force is simply an FBI cover title that makes everybody believe that the FBI is running the show, when in reality, all they are is the cover story that this is a federal law enforcement matter. And meanwhile, the task force is made up of Department of Defense and intelligence agency assets, what we call the interagency cooperation, right? Because, see, everyone's like, yeah, of course the FBI investigates crime. But what they don't realize is that this Joint Terrorism Task Force isn't the FBI. It's only a label that starts with the letters FBI. It is actually an interagency task force mostly made up of Department of Defense and intelligence community agencies and assets that feed this behemoth military industrial complex monster that is being turned against the American people. A behemoth that was designed to track down terrorists all over the world is now being utilized against American citizens on American soil. That 20 plus years of taking the FBI and assigning them to military organizations like the Green Berets or the SEAL team or other military units, and having them tag along and see how we operate against foreign enemies, has trained our law enforcement to operate like a military force and not a law enforcement force. Because the Green Berets, the SEAL team, these Delta Force operators, they don't have to worry about the constitutional rights of their targets. We can go in there, we can kill people and break things, we can kidnap, we can interrogate endlessly, because see, these are enemy combatants. They don't have constitutional rights. But see, the FBI doesn't have that leeway. The FBI has the United States Constitution, for which, one, they don't even have a mandate to exist under the United States Constitution. But let's set that aside. They have to follow these constitutional restrictions on government. And yet, what they've learned over 20 plus years of the war on terrorism, and I'm using my air quotations here, what they've learned is how to operate as a covert, clandestine, and compartmentalized military force. And now that military force is being turned directly on the American people. And that is the most dangerous thing that happened on January 6th, is that they finally, out in the open, executed an operation where all of these assets have been brought together to bear against American citizens who simply showed up to protest the actions of this corrupt federal government. And see, I was simply there to provide security for those people. I wasn't even part of the rally. I was simply there to ensure that these people were protected from counter-protesters who had conducted violent operations in the past. That was it. And yet, I somehow now am a domestic terrorist, a white supremacist. It's completely absurd. But see, they know exactly who I am, and that is why I'm sitting where I am today. But I'm not going to do what a lot have done, which is say, hey, I should have never got tied up in this. What do I have to do to get out of here? I know what they did. I knew what they were doing before it happened. I watched for 4 years a silent coup being committed against this country, whether or not Trump was the target or whether or not he's just a political actor. That is for history to decide. But what I did see for 100% certain is that the aspects of unconventional warfare doctrine were being applied against the American people and were being applied against the federal government of this country with the intent of destroying this country's sovereignty so that they can complete what they want and what they openly say all the time, which is they want a government that is based on global cooperation so that unelected appointees at some nice fancy building in Geneva or whatever and determine the fate of American citizens without their input. This is the agenda for which these compromised entities are attempting to take down America, to eliminate its sovereignty. Because, see, America still, there's a little tiny spark there of liberty and independence still left in America. There's not much. They're very close. They're probably a half generation away, maybe 1 or 2 more fraudulent elections from America being completely dead. And they know this. And this is why January 6th was the modern-day burning of the Reichstag, the event to demonize those who've actually read the Constitution. And even if they haven't read the Constitution, they know that it exists because many 18 to 25-year-olds have no clue what the Constitution is. They think it's some racist doctrine that makes black people 3/5 of a person because that's what their college professor has told them. They have no idea what the Constitution is. They have no idea why our Bill of Rights exists to restrict the federal government from coming against us. And they're perfectly happy being spied on. They're perfectly happy being paid by this federal government for not working. They're perfectly happy with all these things because this is exactly what communism and globalism and Marxism does. And we were warned about it by Yuri Bezmenov, the defected KGB agent in the mid-'80s, when he said, what is happening in America has been so successful on behalf of this globalist communist cabal that we could never in a million years in our wildest dreams have imagined its success. This was in the mid-'80s, and now look at where we are.
Yeah, it's unbelievable we have gotten to this point. And like I said, so many people has their head in the sand. They have no idea. When they hear your story, Jeremy, the first thing they're going to do is say, "Nah, that's not going to happen. That can't happen." But everything that you're saying everything that you even outlined, it has. The pandemic really exposed a lot of what they are willing to do. And I like what you just said about there is still that tiny spark. And yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it with my run for governor. I've seen organizing a movement of people. There are still great Americans out there who love this country, love this flag, who are willing to do what is necessary to make sure that our future aspirations and generations take root and our legacies grow. That's for sure. Can you go into more of the January 6th events and how you were there for the security, and then how the FBI came and asked you basically to be an informant? Did I hear you right on one of your interviews?
Well, let me start from the beginning, but let me warn those who are listening to this broadcast or who eventually will listen to it. In November of 2020, after the election, in fact, on November 9th, just a few days after the November 3rd election, I actively reached out to the Oath Keepers because at that moment, I knew that we had crossed the Rubicon where, as you just said, we're almost at
1 minute left.
The United States is occupied territory. We have already lost control of our government, right? November 3rd of 2020 was not them stealing power. That was not them gaining the power through a fraudulent election. That was them exercising their power to show that they had the power. This is why the fraud was so blatant and so obvious, because they were showing the people in a demoralization effort that we can do whatever we want. In jail, they believe that there's a difference between taking something and stealing something. See, they believe stealing is sneaky. But if they take something, they just walk right up to you and take it. Well, this is the governmental equivalent, the warfare equivalent of the jail definition of taking. This was a blatant taking and a demonstration of power. And so with this backdrop is when I finally said, I've got to do something. So I joined, and I'm using my air quotation, right, because the only way for me to access communications with the Oath Keepers was to join. So I joined, and I called for a meeting of the leadership of the Florida Oath Keepers, because the first thing I knew was that once in an unconventional warfare campaign, once the insurgents gained power of the government, once they actually achieved the overthrow, which is the intent of unconventional warfare, right? A lesser power overthrowing a greater power through insurgency, through sneaky, secretive means, right? Once they gain power, the first thing that they do is conduct mop-up operations. So now that they have the power, they turn the infrastructure of the government they just took over against all of their enemies. Mao did it, Hitler did it, everyone does it, right? Because this is warfare doctrine. You don't leave in place the very people that are going to threaten your new acquisition of power. And so when I met with the Oath Keepers in late November of 2020, that was the exact topic that we discussed. In fact, I put a photograph of my Special Forces team in full gear in Iraq, standing in front of an American flag, and I said, right now, and there was probably about 15, 20 people in the audience, right? I said, right now, there are men dressed like this that have your name in target packets. Now, whether these are the Chinese, whether whoever they work for, you can be assured that what is happening in this country right now, it entails men dressed like this with your names on it. I said, you all have to stop this overt participation in counter-protest operations, right? Because at that time, that's pretty much what the Oath Keepers had done. They'd done a lot of community security. They'd done a lot of disaster relief and things like that. But what they were primarily doing at the time was showing up at Trump rallies, showing up at these pro-Trump rallies, showing up at I'm sorry, people are poking their head in the door, so I got distracted a little bit. But they're showing up at these rallies in order to provide security against BLM, Antifa, or whatever, Sunrise, whatever Marxist subversive organization was showing up as counter-protesters, right? This was their shtick, right? And so I explained to them, these groups are nothing more than the useful idiots of those who are pulling the strings at higher levels. They're meant to create dissent. I mean, you referenced my discussion of unconventional warfare doctrine and the chart, the activities of an insurgency paradigm chart, right? I mean, there's like 22 levels of activities that are conducted during an unconventional warfare operation on behalf of the insurgency. And riots, disaffection, chaos, the demoralizing of law enforcement and military, all of these are aspects of an unconventional warfare campaign. And this is the role of BLM, Antifa, Sunrise, Acorn, whatever the ridiculously foreign-funded rabble-rouser, shit-stirring group is. They're just simple pawns on a chessboard. They're being funded by larger foreign entities. They are being directed through their leadership. This is how compartmentalized operations work, right? The typical 19-year-old soy boy who wears a mask and throws bricks through window, he doesn't know what the hell's going on. He just knows, hey, there's a pile of bricks over there. Go throw them in the windows. It's the leadership, the organizers of these groups that are on the take, that are part of the bigger picture, right? And so that's what the Summer of Love was. And the Oath Keepers had taken up the mantle, the role of providing security at these events. And what I told them is that you have to stop doing this in an overt and open fashion. Because, see, these are simply mapping operations, right? In asymmetric warfare group used to accompany conventional forces, right? They would embed in conventional forces. And in essence, they would be targets. They would know these conventional forces are likely going to be struck by IEDs, but their purpose was to gather the tactics, techniques, and procedures that the enemy was using against our forces in order to develop counter techniques, right? I mean, it's a really crappy job. I would never want to have done it, but this is what happened. Well, this is exactly what mapping operations are. Mapping operations are sitting back, provoking certain activities, and watching how you operate. Why? Well, now I think we know why now, because January 6th was an event where they utilized how do the Oath Keepers look? How do they organize? How do they communicate? How do they move? In order to stage an event that looks like the Oath Keepers were trying to overthrow the government. You see, it was a failed operation because they didn't get the results. They didn't get the response that they had hoped. What they really did want, that crowd of, let's say it's 100,000, let's say it's 50,000 people. They wanted all 50,000 to go along with the Ray Epps's and the other secretive people with the bullhorn saying, go inside, go inside. They wanted people to do what these fake internet, social media trolls posing as QAnon or posing as 3%ers or posing as Oath Keepers or posing as Patriot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on social media. Totally anonymous people, right? They wanted these text messages that they've been using in trial, right? Now, again, they don't know who these people were because they likely were these people. You see, this is a PSYOP, right? This is a digital military deception operation, military information support operation, right? These so-called anonymous voices that they always claim and point to as, see, they were wanting to burn down the Capitol. They were wanting to kill congressmen. But yet they've never found any of these people. Well, they're anonymous. We can't find them. In my case alone, they have information provided by completely anonymous people that they've never investigated who they are. They're just generating stories and photographs and videos and saying, this guy's a terrorist. And the FBI says, all right, okay. In fact, we actually have reason to believe with some very strong circumstantial evidence that some of these so-called social media tipsters, the counterterrorism exposers and sedition hunters and all that stuff, are actually foreign intelligence assets. Some of them are actually tied to Five Eyes, which are intelligence agents that are operating as American allies, right? And they claim that, that's because we're investigating domestic terrorism. No, they're inciting domestic terrorism. Just read some of the messages and then ask them, well, who sent that message? They don't know. They don't care to know. It's just like in my case, the grenades that they say they found, right? Which I don't doubt that the agent, the county deputy that found the grenades, because, there were tons of FBI federal agents there, right? There were bomb techs on behalf of the ATF there, but they're not the ones that found the explosives. No, the useful idiot, the Barney Fife, the local yokel police officers are the ones that found the thing because, that's how compartmentalized operations work. You don't have your guys because now you have plausible deniability. Well, we didn't stage the evidence. We didn't even find it. Deputy Schmedlap found it, right? I mean, this is a clear red flag that immediately goes up to me. Why didn't the agents do the search? If this is domestic terrorism, why are you relying on a county deputy, right? It just doesn't make any sense, right? Jared, I've been in jail for over 770 days and done hundreds of interviews. And you, a man who has firsthand experience with this type of operation in Michigan, with the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, who ran for governor of Michigan, who has a following of 500,000, 500,000 American citizens. And nobody has ever told you about me until Jack Martin. This is how tightly controlled information in America is, because you have to tightly control information when you're dealing with covert, clandestine, and compartmentalized operations. They can't allow the truth to come out, which is why they're desperately preventing the confidential human source information from being released. In fact, to this day, I still have not been provided all the evidence in my 2 counts of misdemeanor trespassing case. To this day, they are still fervently resisting the release of security camera footage. Security camera footage that everyone in America knows exists. Security camera locations that everyone can go to the Capitol, walk around and see. There's nothing classified about the fact that the U.S. Capitol has security footage, right? But see, they don't want the American people to see that footage because it completely exposes that everything that they've been saying is a complete lie. The meeting that I had with Florida Oath Keepers leadership had at least 2 confidential human sources were operating on behalf of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force out of Jacksonville, Florida, in attendance, because I have both of those confidential human source reports. All right, and so these confidential human sources, first of all, confidential human sources are not to be confused with confidential informants, right? A confidential informant is maybe somebody who is a criminal. Maybe you pay him $50, he provides you a tip or some information. But confidential human sources are actively recruited and trained assets. These are individuals who work on the FBI payroll and who likely have spent years working for the FBI or whatever government agency they're reporting under, right? So the idea that the Oath Keepers, an organization that had never been accused of any crimes, especially not accused of any terrorism, right? They weren't on the terrorist watch list. Stuart Rhodes hadn't been arrested for plots in any cities around the country. No, this was a law-abiding American citizen group that focused on community preparedness and providing security at political rallies. This group had been infiltrated by at least this one group. Remember, this is a national organization. So the Florida chapter of the Oath Keepers had 2 in a crowd of about 20 folks. Let's say 15, 20 folks. That's 10% of the crowd is FBI confidential human sources. They've been infiltrated and yet broken no laws. This is a total violation of the 4th Amendment, a total violation of the 1st Amendment, a total violation of their 5th Amendment, right? Their due process was totally being violated by this secretive operation being conducted nationwide. Tens of thousands of confidential human sources. In fact, Laura Logan reported that the FBI themselves says, hey, we had so many confidential human sources on January 6th that we actually, honestly, we lost track of them all, right? Well, this is before January 6th. This is November of 2020. So in these confidential human source reports, the confidential human source doesn't report that Jeremy Brown, a former Green Beret, is telling the Oath Keepers to overthrow the government or training them how to take out law enforcement or any of that. No. What do they report? They report almost exactly what I was saying, which is that the United States is under attack by foreign entities. And I named China because, see, I'm just some guy sitting on his couch that spent 20 years in special operations and held a top secret clearance watching from the outside. I don't have any current secret information, but I know what a duck looks like. And when I see a duck walking across the yard, I go, well, let me open the door and see if that sounds like a duck, because it certainly looks like a duck, right? This is where I am. And this is exactly what I was telling the Oath Keepers. I was warning them that you're about to be targeted for destruction because this country is in a war. Not about to be in a war, not in danger of being in a war. No, we were in a war of which we were losing. And the election was the indication that we no longer have control of this country. And so they needed to, in essence, go underground, right? This was the nature of the meeting. This is the nature of the confidential human sources reports of that meeting. Well, this was November 22nd, 2020. On December 4th of 2020, 2 federal agents from the Department of Homeland Security Investigations working on behalf of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, they just show up at my front door, 7:30 in the morning. They wake up. My girlfriend, I think, is already up. I was asleep. They knock on the door, and they're asking her, hey, ma'am, we're federal agents. We're with the Department of Homeland Security or whatever they said. But we have the video of it. In the interview, we have the footage and the audio of these 2 agents talking to my girlfriend. So my girlfriend was freaked out. She had already woken me up because, see, we were expecting the air conditioner repairman that morning. And see, I have 14 security cameras on my property because I had run for U.S. Congress. The Summer of Love happened. There's just bad people out there. We had problems with a serial harasser in the form of a family member. So we had 14 video cameras on our property. And our policy that I told my girlfriend, do not ever open the door without first checking the cameras. Because, see, just on the front porch alone, we have 3 cameras, right? One with audio recording capability. Then she goes to the door to find 2 federal agents standing there. And what do they want? They want to know where Jeremy Brown is. Because they have reports that he's been making posts about civil war on social media. This is the nonsense that they tell us. Well, here I come. I literally have a Special Forces T-shirt on because that's the first one I grabbed, threw it on, come to the door. I'm half asleep. And I'm like, these aren't air conditioner repair guys, right? But I stand there in silence as I listen to these 2 federal agents explain why they're looking for me. She asked if they have a card. He pulls out a business card that is literally printed on 20-pound cheap government printer paper. Not card stock, not with a raised, embossed Department of Homeland Security gold seal or anything. No, it's literally printed out on computer paper and cut with scissors. We still have this ridiculous business card to this day, right? So he hands that to me, but still never addresses me. I can tell on their faces that they're like, wait, this must be Jeremy. But they never actually address me, so I never say anything. I'm looking at this flimsy card. I look outside at their cars. One is in a 3-year-old Ford Taurus or Ford Fusion, one of the 2, and the other one's in a F-150 pickup truck, and they're parked separately. So I'm thinking, flimsy card. These guys don't look like federal agents. They're literally wearing masks. They're untucked polo shirts. All of that. You can see the video yourself. I now begin to think these aren't federal agents. These are fakes, right? Maybe they're members of Antifa or whatever, and maybe we've been doxxed and they're targeted. So I still don't say anything to them. They simply say, yeah, we're looking for Jeremy. And she's like, oh, well, he's not here right now, blah, 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 right? They leave. As you can see on the video, they leave. As they're walking away, they look and they see that I fly my American flag upside down, which is the international in distress. And everyone should be flying their flag upside down because we are an occupied country. But these agents literally make notes and point, and you can see them in the camera. Say, oh, yeah. And if you could hear them, I'm sure they were saying, I'm pretty sure that was him. All right. So I immediately take the business card and I email them, right? Because let me give you a life hack, folks. Never communicate with anyone from the federal government that you don't have a record of. So if you're in a to consent record state, don't try to record them. Only communicate via email. So that's what I did. I reached out to the agent on the card. He had a government domain name. And I said, I understand you're looking for me. And that's when the conversation starts. So this agent says, yeah, we'd like to sit down with you, have a conversation. And I said, well, I need you to tell me what the conversation is going to be about, because I'm not looking to be General Flinded, right? I mean, I know how the government works. I'm not a moron. I'm a retired 20-year government employee. And so they're like, well, don't worry, it's not a criminal matter, right? Like, I thought they were investigating me making social media posts about Civil War, but now they're saying, oh, this has nothing to do with a criminal matter. And I said, well, I'm going to need more information than that, or else we're not going to meet. And he says, well, it has to do with some social media posts that you made. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. And so I said, well, we're going to meet in public, and I'm going to record the meeting. Now, remember, I'm warning them that I'm about to record this meeting. So everything you hear when you listen to the full recording of the meeting, of which you can find on my website, you can hear the whole recorded meeting, me go through and break it all down. They said all these things knowing they were being recorded. Now, maybe they didn't believe that I was recording them, but the things that they say on that recording, there's many damaging things that they say, right? Just know that they knew they were being recorded when they said those things. So imagine what they might have said if they didn't know they were being recorded. But regardless, we set up the meeting. I show up to the meeting. I set it in a public place. I conduct all my surveillance detection routes because I'm an actual experienced special operator, unlike these guys. So I identified that they parked their cars separately and all this other stuff, right? They're trying really hard. But when I show up and I introduce myself, you can hear the agent introduce himself. I say, hi, I'm Jeremy. They're like, I'm Agent so-and-so. We work on behalf of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. And I say, well, I'm familiar with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. I've worked with them in the past. And the agent literally says, well, you might be working with them again. We'll see how this goes. This happens at 38 seconds into the meeting. So I immediately know, right then and there, that this has nothing to do with anything other than them attempting to try to recruit me. Because, again, I knew at the 38-second mark that they were there to recruit me to join them. And when they asked, well, if you hear anything in the groups that you're with, well, at the time, the only groups I was associated with were the Oath Keepers and the Special Forces Association. Both groups of whom I immediately warned about this meeting afterwards, but certainly not groups that were a danger to the federal government to the point where they would task 2 federal agents to take time out of their busy week. Because remember, this is 5 days later from their initial approach, right? I knew that these groups had nothing to do with the things that they're looking for. I even questioned them about why aren't they looking into BLM and Antifa? They're the controlled groups that are the danger. Right? So they end with, well, look, we don't have to get you signed up today, fingerprinted or anything like that. But, if you hear anything, the government pays for this type of information, as if I don't understand how the whole system works. And I say, oh, hey, no problem, yeah. And we go our separate ways. You can hear it for yourself. But at that point, there was no January 6th. And so my immediate concerns were, why is the FBI trying to spy on groups that haven't committed any crimes? It wasn't until the events of January 6th, after the events of January 6th, and the hearing of the false narrative, that it became clear to me what this December 9th effort to recruit me, a retired Army Green Beret, who had a history within the covert, clandestine, and compartmentalized information and operations community, why they would be recruiting me, right? And so I go about my merry way. I actually attempt to reach out to some media outlets. I don't really get any response. I wish to this day I would have just taken them up on their offer and kind of, worked myself in. I'd have a lot more concrete information rather than just my professional circumstantial experience-based, conjecture or analysis, right? But from that day, I basically stepped back away from the Oath Keepers. Well, then, of course, 10 days later, Trump announces the January 6th rally. After the announcement of the January 6th rally, I reached back out. I stepped away from the Oath Keepers because I knew I'd been targeted by the FBI. And so I kind of stepped away. I didn't want to cause any more problems. But now I reach back out to them. I say, hey, are you guys planning on going to this rally? Are y'all planning on providing any security? And they're like, yeah, we've been invited by some organizers to provide security for speakers and organizers and things like that. And I said, well, I'm planning on also going. And so if you need any additional manpower, I'd be more than happy to help. And they're like, okay, great, we'll plug you in. So January 4th, we link up, we drive, we caravan up, we stop off in North Carolina. And so the famous QRF plan that the government loves to point out to, where the Oath Keepers staged an arsenal of weapons near the Capitol. The actual true description of that is Oath Keepers in an attempt to follow the law as laid forth by the District of Columbia, make sure that they carry no weapons into the Capitol area by leaving them in a legal state under the guard of a 65-year-old elderly man. That's the truth. That is why the weapons are left in a hotel in Virginia. They were actually left in North Carolina and transported separately to the hotel in Virginia because the Oath Keepers had contacts in the Metro D.C. Police Department. They had contacts in the Capitol Police. They were saying, hey, what is legal to carry? Because remember, we're conducting security operations, which is why we're wearing vests. It's why we're wearing helmets. It's why we're wearing goggles. It's why we're wearing masks, right? It's why many guys are carrying bear spray. Why? Because these police contacts said, oh, it's legal to have spray in D.C. Are you sure? Yeah. Just make sure it's this, that, or the other type of spray. The FBI has all this communications. They know that these are the conversations going on. What weapons are? Make sure your knives aren't this many inches. Make sure this. You can't have guns. You can't have this. Okay, so we're going to leave the guns in Virginia. In the event something really bad happens, right? That's the reason why we have a Second Amendment. We have the right to defend ourselves. If Antifa gunmen show up and start mowing everybody down with machine guns, you as an American citizen have the right to brandish your firearm in your own self-defense, right? This is why we kept our weapons nearby. Not to overthrow the government, because, see, they were never actually moved to D.C. And the Oath Keepers went inside the Capitol. So if the event was to overthrow the Capitol, why wouldn't the guns, once they gained access to the Capitol, why wouldn't the guns been brought forward? Well, because that's a completely false lie narrative. The reality is the Oath Keepers completely followed every District of Columbia unconstitutional law in order to stay legal. That's the true story of the QRF.
Why can't this all come out? Like, obviously they infiltrated a lot of levels of organizations. They kind of put their 2 cents on things to influence some people, the pawns, as you say. So now we're at January 6th, and, President Trump speaks, and then he goes down and tells everyone to go peacefully protest. So we saw some of the footage of the cops letting these protesters in. I mean, where were you at when this was all going down?
All right. So I've got there's one more key aspect before January 6th.
Okay.
And I know this because of my discovery. We arrive on January 5th. Okay, so the Oath Keepers are actually providing security on both days. There are events all over D.C., right, on January 5th and 6th. So I'm there on the ground in the exact same thing I'm wearing on January 6th. I'm there on January 5th. In fact, Reuters publishes a photograph of me from January 5th that's all over my indictments and all over my legal paperwork, right? Because, wow, I look like a guy there to mix it up with bad guys, right? And so it looks scary to the average college boy. But on January 5th, right? Now remember, confidential human sources, agents have met with me. On January 5th, the National Terrorist Operations Center, which is another ambiguous government agency monitoring operations center, right? The National Terrorist Operations Center initiates an assessment of me, Jeremy Brown, on January 5th. Now, they know who I am. They just met with me. They made no follow-up attempt to meet with me after the December 9th meeting, and yet now on January 5th, they've initiated this National Terrorism Operations Center assessment of me. And then, of course, on January 6th, we show up in the morning, about 6 a.m. We actually, our group, the Kelly Meggs, Jessica Watkins, Kenny Harrelson, all of the crowd that you've been told are the unarmed overthrowers of the United States government. Well, we won't pass right through U.S. Secret Service security checkpoint. Who knew who we were because our names were submitted to the U.S. Secret Service in order to gain our credentials to pass through this checkpoint. Because the people we're providing security to are inside the VIP section. So we're being allowed into the innermost area of the presidential security ring. In fact, as I'm standing about 25, 50 feet from the presidential podium at approximately 9:30 in the morning on January 6th, my phone rings. And who is it? It's Agent Brett Lindsay, the very man who attempted to recruit me on December 9th, who showed up at my house on December 4th. He just calls out of the blue. 9:30 approximately. I have the screenshot. In the original interview I do with Brandon Gray from JustAnotherChannel.com, he has the screenshot showing Brett Lindsay's number on my cell phone. He calls. He wants to say, hey, what's going on? We're busy. I'm in D.C. right now. I'm working. So I can't hear you. I got to go, right? It's a very brief conversation. But isn't it odd that right as I'm standing right next to the podium, the very guy who attempted to recruit me less than a month ago is now calling me? Well, we now know because of discovery documents, the FBI had taken out a warrant for everybody's GPS data on their phone. That, again, another cover story, right? They were already tracking everybody's GPS data because, see, that's what the government does, right? The idea that they had a warrant to do it on January 6th, well, that seems awfully quick to get a warrant the exact same day, right? But yet, this is all part of the false narrative. So 9:30 in the morning, the agent calls me. I quickly get off the phone with him, and I think, that's kind of odd. Why is this guy calling me? I know he knows where I am, right? I know that the government illegally monitors people's cell phone. I've literally been part of it. I've sat in a room with a signal intelligence unit illegally monitoring Americans. And when I say, isn't it illegal for you guys to monitor? We just don't take any notes or anything. I mean, we're actually monitoring who they're talking to, blah, blah, blah. And we know about the unmasking scandal of all this other stuff during the Russian host, right? The government is monitoring everything that you do. This is the lesson. But we all sit there. We're about 25 rows back from the president. We're on the very back row of the innermost circle of seating, right? And so we're sitting back there with donors. We're seeing all of your talking heads, all of your conservative movement bloggers and podcasters. They're all inside this little VIP area, right? The president gets up and speaks. It's actually a really cool environment. At the time, I wasn't even a huge Trump supporter because I was pretty upset at how COVID was handled and how the lack of federal involvement in the summer of love and quelling the violence across the cities as America burned. But, it was pretty cool. It was a good vibe, a good environment. And then, of course, about halfway through the president's speech, it's time for us to go because we weren't allowed to bring any of our gear into the perimeter. Even though we went up to the Secret Service with all our gear on, We told them, hey, we're here. We're part of the security detail for some of the speakers. They're like, you can come in, but you can't bring your gear, right? The Secret Service didn't go, oh, my gosh, a bunch of terrorists are at the checkpoint with all of their gear and no weapons. No, they said, yeah, just ground your gear over there. We're like, fine, we'll leave a guard on it. So about halfway through President Trump's speech, we leave. We break off to go get our gear, get kitted up, and get ready to receive our protectees for the movement from the elite to the Capitol, right? And so we're walking down the street. And, of course, we don't encounter any violence at all. There's no Antifa on the side. There's no BLM on the side. No one's throwing frozen water bottles. We're just moving nice and easy until we get near the Capitol grounds. But yet, along the way, there's all these rumors. Oh, the Capitol's been breached. All of this stuff. We're like, what is going on? Man, the American people must really be pissed, right? But we don't have anything to do with that. We're there to protect this woman because this woman is going to see her son speak on the U.S. Capitol grounds at an event that the President of the United States just invited well over 1 million people to come listen to, right? So I can only imagine that she's super proud, right? So we're moving. We finally encounter the stack up of the crowd as we approach the Capitol. At this point, and this is what makes me kind of laugh every time I hear the government narrative. At this point, as we're approaching this crowd, right, and we have to move through the crowd, I direct members of my security detail, hey, grab the person in front of you and weave through the crowd. So they grab the person in front of them by the shoulder, and they start to snake through the crowd. You know, much like kindergartners do with the little caterpillar, right? So that nobody gets lost moving through the crowd. This is the infamous tactical movement that the Department of Justice refers to when these same Oath Keepers later use the same technique to move through the crowd, moving up the stairs to go investigate what's going on inside the Capitol, because we were hearing a lot of rumors, but nobody had any communication. Nobody's cell phones are working right. So this indication of tactical training, what's known as a ranger file, which is what I've read in many of the reports, right? Which a ranger file is simply just walking in a line, right? But they putting your hand on the person in front of you is just to make sure you don't have a break in contact. This technique, literally the Oath Keepers were just instructed to use by me moments earlier in order to move through the crowd, and now the DOJ uses it as some kind of narrative that, oh, they're clearly, Delta Force now because they have hands on each other's shoulders. It's completely absurd, all right? But I always like to make this point because they've made such a huge deal about this photograph or this video of these Oath Keepers moving up through the crowd as if this is some kind of evidence that they prepared to conduct an armed overthrow of the U.S. Capitol. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. I spent 20 years in Army Special Operations, 3 years with 1st Ranger Battalion, and 17 years as a Green Beret, retiring as a Master Sergeant, having led Special Forces teams in combat. And the United States government wants you to believe that I allowed myself to submit to a plan put forth by a used car salesman from Florida to overthrow the United States government, but leave the weapons to do such an operation in Virginia. This is the narrative that the government has put forth. It's insulting to me personally, but it really should be even more so insulting to you. Okay? In the Proud Boys case, the government wants you to believe that the Proud Boys also took part in this unarmed overthrow of the Capitol. But before they initiated, they stopped at the food truck right outside the Capitol and grabbed lunch. This is the absurdity. The head of the Proud Boys wasn't even allowed in the Capitol area, and yet he's been convicted of 22 years in federal prison. This is how ridiculous the narrative is. But so as we move through this bunch up of people, we move along the outer sidewalk perimeter of the Capitol over to what is the east side what you would commonly refer to as the front of the Capitol, the majestic photograph of all three sections of the U.S. Capitol building with the dome and everything. That was the side we were on. This is the side we were told the stages were going to be set up, and it's also the side of which the map provided by the Gateway Pundit indicates where the stages are going to be set up well in advance. But yet when we get there, there's no stages. But as we're moving up there, the Oath Keepers are getting all these reports that, they've stormed the Capitol, there's fights, and there's all this other stuff. And so everyone is all like super excited because why? They're a personal protection detail. They're in a tactical mindset. They're like, hey, there's violence going on. We should investigate, right? They're all trying to jackrabbit ahead because, see, they're all amped up. Meanwhile, our protectee, this little civilian woman, is in tears. And so I see her crying, and so I say, stop. And I hold up our whole little group. And I say, ma'am, what's wrong? Well, she advises me that she has a medical condition and that she can't keep up with the Oath Keepers. So I pull them aside. Now, this actual pulling aside of the Oath Keepers at this time, outside of the Capitol, on the outer perimeter of the Capitol, is captured on video from a portable security tower that's in my discovery. This meeting where I pull the Oath Keepers in and I basically issue them a reprimand and say, you guys need to slow down. Your focus should be her, not all this other nonsense going on. You don't know what's going on. You don't need to be involved in that. That's not your mission. So, again, I'm paraphrasing. After this meeting, we go back, we gather up our protectees. This is the point where they make the call that we want to go see what's going on, and this is where they break off from the rest of the security detail, and this is where you see the moving up the stairs. It wasn't because Kelly Meggs made the call that, hey, we've received phase line gold. It's time to execute our assault on the Capitol because the Proud Boys have secured Sector 5, right? Time to go, right? No, that's what the government wants you to believe happened. What really happened was curiosity killed the cat, right? These amped up security detail members said, we want to investigate what's going on. And so what do? They break off, they go up the steps, they go into the Capitol as everyone else was allowed to go into the Capitol, all captured on video in my discovery, right? The very door the Oath Keepers entered was clearly open from the inside. And here, let me describe this video to you. You see the door from the inside of the Capitol. The camera is looking at the door from the inside of the Capitol, looking outward at the door. You can see through the window that there are Metro PD officers on the other side of the door in riot gear. How do I know this? Because I can see their large white lettered markings on their black riot helmets. They're outside the door. And then you can also see the crowd gathered. But there's no fight. There's no pushing. And there's probably shoving because it's a very tight crowd. Inside the Capitol, there's two angles. There's an angle looking into the rotunda from above that door, and then there's the camera looking at that door. Out of nowhere comes this guy in civilian clothes, a little bit portly, with a scraggly beard. He looks like a protester, right? But yet there's very few people in the rotunda, but there's a guy in a suit with a walkie-talkie. He walks right by that guy. There's other law enforcement officers. Nobody tries to stop this guy. He walks up to the door. He attempts to open the door, okay, to obviously let the crowd in. But the door doesn't open. Why? Because these doors are magnetized locks. They're centralized controlled doors, meaning the command center that is manned by the Capitol Police has control over these doors. This gentleman attempts a couple times to open the door, steps back from the doors, looks up clearly at someone or a camera or something, mouths words because there's no audio, and then the doors open. This video is in my discovery. At this time, all of these protesters are allowed to flow right past the Metro police officers who make no attempt to really stop them at all and flood into the rotunda. This is the door that the OC, you can clearly see them enter. Then you can clearly watch their actions inside the rotunda. No violence, no controversy. There's no brawls between the law enforcement, of which there are numerous law enforcement officers inside this Capitol rotunda at this particular door, which is just one of many doors. And then after a few minutes or whatever, you see everyone start to exit this door. And in fact, at one point
You have 1 minute
you see
left.
the Oath Keepers, you see these very Oath Keepers that were there to apparently unarmed overthrow the government, according to the Department of Justice, actually converse with law enforcement and at times attempt to assist the shooing of people back outside the Capitol. See, this is just one video angle of which I have, of which the government has told me I'm not allowed to talk about, of which the government is also hiding from you. And so when we call back, I will pick up from there. But I wanted to make the point that this gentleman, dressed in civilian clothes, clearly asked for that door to be open, and it was.
So let's move on to the notorious Olive Garden after action report that I've heard you talk about, that you weren't there, but they accused you of being there.
Yeah. So, well, there's a couple of key points. I definitely want to get to that. So I just described you where the Oath Keepers went. Me and the female Oath Keeper and the protectee stayed outside. The protectee ultimately said, hey, there's no stages here. I'm going to just go back to my hotel room. All right. So we continued to meander around, observe. And what we observed is people just singing, chanting, law enforcement standing around, no active denial operations, no announcements that there's no announcements that this is an unlawful assembly, none of that, right? In fact, columns of riot cops are moving through the crowd. The crowd is stepping aside and allowing them to go in the Capitol. The free flow of movement. There's none of this controversy. There's none of this violence. We hear the rumors of somebody being shot, but there's no EMS response. There's no officers running around frantically. And so I just chalk it up as a rumor, right? So all of this happens. Later, at approximately 4, is when we get a call from Kelly Meggs, who tells us, hey, there's violence and there's injuries over on the west side of the Capitol. So we move over there, and that's where we finally encounter actual violence. But it was violence on behalf of law enforcement. It was the riot police literally just beating senseless, unprotected, in many cases, elderly people, women. In fact, there's body cam footage where you can clearly hear the people chanting, protect the women, protect the women. Well, we're protecting the women from the police, not from us, right? They're launching ballistic munitions and tear gas. And, I mean, the guys with the clubs are just swinging relentlessly. There's blood all over the ground, but it's not law enforcement blood. It's American citizen blood, right? And so this is how the day ends. So that body cam footage of which you're not allowed to see, there's 2 hours of it before that moment. And it's just cops standing around, Trump supporters conversing with them casually. And it isn't until they're given the orders, they move into place, and then they start pushing the crowd back, utilizing violence and riot control techniques. But they seem to be enjoying themselves. In fact, you can even hear me on the body cam telling them, guys, you're enjoying this too much. See, I'm looking at their eyes. I'm seeing their facial expressions. And some of the cops were not comfortable with what they were doing, but some of them were very comfortable and excited by the fact that they actually get to hit some of these people. And it's actually a disgusting show force.
So let me ask you this question before you go on, Jeremy, real quick. So obviously they're not releasing all of the January 6th footage. Do you believe if all of that January 6th footage was released, do you think the government's narrative would fall apart?
I mean, their government's narrative is already falling apart just on the limited release. I mean, look at what Stephen Baker from the Blaze has uncovered about Officer Harry Dunn and his perjury in federal court. literally describing an event that never happened because he was on camera the whole time. I mean, there were tons of body-worn cameras on that event. There were thousands of civilian cameras running that day, not to mention the hundreds of Capitol closed-circuit television cameras running that day. His entire interactions with Oath Keepers or any other riot was almost exclusively caught on video. And yet he had the nerve or maybe the knowledge of protection that he could go into a federal courtroom and under oath tell a complete lie in a federal criminal trial that resulted in multiple double-digit sentences to federal prison, multiple felonies. He was perfectly comfortable lying about that. Why? Because he was told to lie, and he was told that the truth would never come out, which is why he's written a book. Now, this guy that apparently is so distraught and so disturbed, he's found the time to write a book so that he could profit off of his lies. But see, there's a problem with that, is that now his lies are in writing, which is exactly the point of my trials. See, I want the government in writing. I want official government transcripts of what they are telling the juries and what they're telling the American people. Because, see, I know that the truth is going to come out. And, see, it's kind of hard to change the official testimony under oath after the video comes out and says, oh, well, Officer Dunn, here it clearly shows that you weren't in danger at the very time that you claimed that you were. And so, yes, not only will the truth come out with full revelation, but the truth is coming out with just these partial revelations of which people are scraping and fighting and, you know, they're doing everything they can to get access to this video, of which the Republicans in Congress currently control. Keep that in mind. The so-called good guys in this fight are the ones in control of this footage that is not being released to the American people. It's not even being released to the defendants in this case, much less being looked at by some subcommittee hearing.
Well, they're
because
in action.
We're almost 3 years into this now.
Yeah,
so, yes, it will reveal the truth, and that's why they're fighting desperately to hide it.
And plus, and their inaction will not be forgotten. That is for sure. So you look at your appeal right now, and in their own words from another case, I heard you state that they need to point out, the government, that is, must show a nexus in their argument in the domestic terrorist investigation. And you're kind of using that case against them in your appeal case. Is that true?
Well, yeah, it's like arguing with your wife. The best way to win is to use her own words against her, or likewise, a wife arguing with a husband. And so we've literally, the judge that signed this illegal search warrant, my appeals attorney has actually found his own words claiming that there must be a nexus, which even that is a ridiculous legal argument because it clearly violates the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says that you must be shown with probable cause to have been involved in a crime in order for a warrant to be granted. It doesn't say a nexus to the crime. Hell, a nexus to the crime is you live in the same house with the criminal. That's a nexus, right? A nexus is just simply a link, right? But that's not the constitutional standard for a warrant, and which is why the Patriot Act is clearly an unconstitutional piece of legislation that must be overturned. Because, see, this is what they rely on in order to just have carte blanche any fishing expedition they want. They can simply say, oh, well, this is all part of an investigation. Well, how about this? How about the fact that domestic terrorism is not actually even a statutory crime? That the U.S. Criminal Code merely defines domestic terrorism, but actually doesn't make it a crime. International terrorism is actually stated as a crime. But see, Congress intentionally did not define domestic terrorism because that's kind of a touchy situation. They define it in the criminal code, but they don't actually make it illegal. But yet the FBI now, all they have to do is investigate domestic terrorism, and that gives them a free pass to go anywhere and do anything and search anybody for anything, right?
Well, what about,
and this is why.
Yeah, what about with, you said the federal government, like the state responsibility, for goodness sakes, is to protect your citizens from the federal government. So, where is the state of Florida in protecting you? Are they just sitting on the wayside?
Of course. In fact, the Attorney General, Ashley Moody, again, supposedly a good guy, right? Because she's a Republican. And that's what they tell us. They tell patriots that the Republicans are the good guys and the Democrats are the bad guys. And yet, Ashley Moody, who was provided a legal explanation by one of my attorneys as to how the federal government was violating the 10th Amendment in my case, immediately turned that correspondence, which is between my attorneys and the head law enforcement officer of the state of Florida, turned it over the very next day to the very FBI and the Department of Justice that we were claiming was violating Florida state trust law. And so this is the reality. Right? The very county that I sit in today, the sheriff of this county, Mike Pendergrass, who should know better because he's a retired Army officer, has publicly stated how he loves working with his federal partners in rounding up these criminals from January 6th. In multiple instances, he's made these public statements.
Unbelievable.
Well, Mr. Pendergrass, the sheriff of Citrus County, has made no effort to have a conversation with me, who sits in the jail in his very county. And actually, here's a little known fact. I had a phone conversation with Sheriff Pendergrass when I was running for U.S. Congress in Tampa. And he was like, yeah, I'll be more than happy to sit down with you and provide you with any information and help out in any way. But yet he's made no effort to get to the actual truth behind January 6th by coming and sitting down before he lavishes the federal government with praise. But it might have something to do with just yesterday. Citrus County was awarded $5 million of federal law enforcement money to hire more officers. And boy, they're really super excited about this federal money coming into Citrus County. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the Citrus County Sheriff bending over backwards to do whatever the FBI asked them to do. But see, this is the danger of states allowing their authority and their power to be usurped by this out-of-control federal government.
Jeremy, why not take a plea? I mean, the 2 misdemeanor charges that they got you with, you probably already have time served. You'd be out free right now. Why aren't you taking a plea?
The reason I'm not taking a plea, first of all, is because I'm not a criminal. I'm not going to be guilty to something I didn't do. I was on Capitol grounds, which is, according to Nancy Pelosi, the people's house. That's my house. I pay the mortgage. I spent 20 years in U.S. Army Special Operations in order to ensure that house is supposed to be operating on the behalf of the American people. I'm pretty sure I have the right to go visit that house, to check in on my employees, a.k.a. members of Congress. But that point aside, there were permits for that day. I was legally permitted to be there as part of an event that was protected under the First Amendment. In fact, as a retired member of the United States military, I am subject to recall by the Secretary of the Army. So that recall would be on behalf of the Commander-in-Chief, the overall command authority of the United States military. Well, that day, on January 6th, the Commander-in-Chief was Donald J. Trump. And on a stage on White House grounds, the Commander-in-Chief told me that we're going to go to the Capitol and we're going to let our voices be heard. Now, I'm not part of the protest, but I am providing security for the protest. Therefore, the Commander-in-Chief just authorized me, as a retired member of the U.S. military, to go to Capitol grounds. Well, then how could I have trespassed? But see, it's worse than that for the government. The charge isn't that I was on restricted grounds. It is that I knowingly was on restricted grounds. See, I've not violated any barriers. I was following the instructions of the Commander-in-Chief. There were properly permitted protests scheduled for Capitol grounds. There were no fences, no barriers, no signs. Not one law enforcement officer is on any body-worn camera ever telling me to do anything other than move. Okay, well, he told me to move, I moved. Did he tell me you are engaged in an unlawful assembly? No. Did he tell me to leave Capitol ground? All he said was move, 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 which is just a common chant that law enforcement in riot configuration give to move the crowd back. And that's exactly what I did. See, the government has no case. I've broken no laws. But see, what the government doesn't want is me telling the story that I'm telling you, the truth, on the stand. You see, I am the one guy of all the January 6ers that says, yeah, I used to do this for a living, and this is all very, very suspicious. It looks a lot like a clandestine government operation. And the funny thing is I just interviewed with a podcaster that said he's talked to special mission unit guys that were actually operating that day. And they're like, yeah, we didn't understand why we were there either.
Thanks again for spending this much time with us. Man, we really appreciate it. We're going to put together one hell of a story with this to push it out. So let's move on from.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you giving me the time. You see, there are so many minute and nuanced details that I never actually get to explain and tie together as to why I fully believe that this is a government operation. So this is probably going to be one of the longest interviews that I've done since the original 2-hour interview that I did with Brandon Gray. So I definitely want to spend as much time as possible because you're right, like the Olive Garden thing, which I definitely wrote it through now, but it's one of my favorite aspects of this because it just shows how ridiculous their investigation is.
Yeah, I mean, just some of the stuff that you're saying, and we obviously know why they're not releasing the footage because it would bring down the government's narrative, and there would probably be an uprising, and a lot of heads would probably roll because people would finally realize how corrupt the government is and what the government's willing to do to ordinary, average Americans who are just, doing their First Amendment right.
That's right. And see, again, if you're asking yourself, well, why would the government do this? First of all, don't use the term the government. The government is just the government is just a collection of whoever the people are that are in charge at the time. This is an effort by those who seek to destroy America that have infiltrated our government and now are acting as our government. But they are not the government as laid out by our founding documents, right? The federal government is not operating within the bounds of the Constitution and have not operated within the bounds of the Constitution for a very, very long time. This did not just happen when Trump ran for office. This has been happening at least since before 1985 when Yuri Bezmenov, a former KGB defector, admitted that, yeah, we've been attacking America through academia and this cultural Marxism for literally decades to the point where now in 1985, we believe that we've achieved our goals, right?
Well,
this didn't just happen because of Trump.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you could probably even go back even to the JFK assassination when our own CIA looks like they assassinated him because he was going to destroy the CIA and spread it to the far corners of the earth, right?
President Eisenhower, in his farewell address, warned that the United States was at risk of two groups. Who? The military-industrial complex, which gets all the press. But who else? The scientific elites, right? These are the two groups in Eisenhower's farewell address that he warns about. Smedley Butler warned that he was approached to take part in a coup against the United States. Since the signing of the document, the Constitution of the United States has been under attack by the forces of evil that seek to destroy human liberty. And this is nothing but the culmination of a long, protracted war against the document itself in general and the people specifically, right? I mean, look at what's been accomplished through the Federal Reserve Act that was passed in 1913. And now look, we're $34 trillion in debt. Why? Because of the Federal Reserve Act. It only took just over 100 years to destroy America financially. What do they say? give me control of the currency and I care not who makes the laws, right? This is the warfare that we're engaged in. And January 6th is just the latest and more progressive effort, right? Just like out of Hitler's power, he attacked his capital and blamed it on who? His enemies at the time, which were the communists, right? This is simply history rhyming. It's not exactly the same because, see, every time you conduct an operation, you do an after-action review. What worked? What didn't work? How can we do it better next time? So it's not going to repeat exactly. They're going to get better with each successive fake emergency that they create. They're going to be better at it. Why? Because the last time they learned, oh, well, that didn't work, this did work, so let's change it this time. And that's exactly what we see. And so January 6th is no different. But you talk about the Olive Garden dinner, right?
Correct.
I found this to be particularly hilarious because, remember, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys have secretly behind the scenes, even though they were completely infiltrated by the FBI, managed to pull off an attempted unarmed overthrow of the United States government with just a handful of people, and when the brave, historic actions of the Capitol Police and Metro PD, no government agents, no, there was no government agents, there was no DOD allowed to be involved, right? They were able to fend off these vicious attackers in this failed, unarmed overthrow of the United States government. And so the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, do they retreat into the mountains? Do they run to their bunkers in the desert? Right? Do they run for their lives because their attempt to overthrow the United States government without any weapons failed? No. They go to Olive Garden. Yeah. Olive Garden also has security cameras, but they also have unlimited breadsticks. Yeah. So, security of our clandestine overthrow of their government versus free breadsticks. We're going to choose Olive Garden.
I tell you what, that would be the first thing that I would want after my attempt to overthrow the government is, man, I'm hungry for some breadsticks. Let's go to Olive Garden.
I mean, look, it was cold that day, and everybody knows that when you're cold, your metabolism burns more calories. We're starving, right? But see, here's one little small problem. The FBI claims that I was at this dinner, but the bigger part of that small problem is they were actually talking to me through their agent that tried to recruit me in December, called me on the morning of January 6th, who is now texting me while I'm at my RV park in College Park, Maryland. Now, we know that the FBI took out a warrant to get all the cell phone data from the Capitol area because they admit to that in the very documents of which they charged me with trespassing. But yet, months now later, I believe this interview of this waiter happened in June of 2020. This waiter apparently identified me as being one of the people at this Olive Garden celebration meeting, or maybe the licking of the wounds meeting, even though they know good and well exactly where I was. But there's something more interesting with this report because, see, this is the way the FBI does it. They have their agents sit down with whoever, right, and they make handwritten notes. Well, then they go back later, usually a couple of days, and they type up the report. Well, you would think that the notes should match the content of the FBI 302, which is a reporting document. It's funny that they don't match. And see, in some of my discovery, I actually was given the handwritten notes, and so I can read the notes, and then I can read the report, and I can identify that that's not the same thing. Like, for example, in that particular incident, the waiter says, I didn't identify any guns. But yet in the official FBI 302, it says that the waiter thought they identified an individual with a gun or could possibly have been a gun. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what this individual said.
You would think in those discrepancies, those little things would add up to be big things in the trial, and a common sense jury would be like, this is garbage. This guy's not guilty.
That's because you watch a lot of law shows, probably Law and Order or Mississippi Burning, and you think that FBI report and those notes are admissible as evidence, but they're not.
Oh.
Did you know that?
No, I did not.
If I wanted to include this report as evidence, they would simply say, oh, well, that's just, I forget their terminology, it's like work product, or that's not actual evidence. But see, if somebody were to have lied in one of those documents, then the FBI would say, oh, well, they lied on this official piece of evidence, right? So see, they play it both ways.
Yeah.
When it supports their narrative, they'll be allowed to admit it as evidence. But if it doesn't support their narrative, well, then they'll claim, oh, well, that's just so unverified. We just wrote down some notes. It's no deal. And see, you saw this with the 1023 form, the FD 1023, which is a confidential human source reporting form, where the FBI director lied to the American people and said, oh, well, this is an unverified report. Well, no, the form itself is just a blank piece of paper in essence. The information on the form, we don't know whether it's verified or not, because until you read the form, you don't know. Because on the human intelligence reporting forms, the handler or the asset case officer, or whatever the description is, depending on what agency you're dealing with, they'll lay out the historic nature of the report. Was it a walk-in, meaning did our asset just come because he needs more money to buy meth, and so he wants to throw out some information? That's not likely to be very viable information. Or is this source have a history of accurate reporting? Was he tasked to get this information directly by his handler? See, that's going to be on the report. And so the report might read, oh, this is a voluntary walk-in, and therefore that report isn't going to be as viable as one that says this person is reporting and has a history of accurate reporting, and whose reports actually confirm the reports of this other asset. Now, that report is totally verifiable. See, that is dual source reporting, which is the holy grail of human intelligence, right? If we could get a totally unconnected source to confirm or deny something that another source has said, well, if it confirms, well, then that's dual source reporting. That is actionable intelligence, right? And so the FBI director lied to the American people by downplaying the significance of these confidential human source reports. But see, there's other reports that aren't on the 1023 form, like tasking reports, right? Meaning an asset handler may receive direct instructions from his command, all right? We call direct taskings, right? You're meeting with source 123. We need to know, does he have knowledge of any activities by the Oath Keepers taking place on January 6th? That would be a direct tasking. Therefore, when that handler meets with that confidential human source, he is obligated by direct order to first collect the answer to that tasking. And afterwards, we could talk about anything. We could talk about the Super Bowl. We could talk about his girlfriend or whatever. But see, that's also another form of which the FBI does not want anyone to see what type of taskings were issued to the so many human sources that day that we lost track of them, right? Which is, again, a complete lie, because every single source has given up their cell phone number, and every single cell phone number can be tracked. So they know exactly where their sources are. They know exactly what their sources are saying and who they're saying it to, right? And so this is the danger of somebody like me getting access to the confidential human source documentation and information in this case, because I know what it means. I know what to look for. I know that guy just didn't walk into the FBI field office in Jacksonville the other day and say, I know about this Jeremy Brown guy. No, he was actively recruited. He's on the payroll, and he's acting as a paid spy for the federal government without a warrant to surveil on American citizens that have broken no
You have
law.
1 minute left.
And so I'm telling you, the confidential human source network involved in January 6th is the linchpin that it is the card that makes the whole house of cards fall down. And so you ask, why am I taking my case to trial, even though I'm already time served? Because I'm going to get that confidential human source. And they're listening right now. They know that I'm coming after it, and they know why I'm coming after it, because they've read all my NCOERs. They know exactly where I work. They know exactly what I did during my military career. And I haven't been afraid to tell them that I'm coming for this information because I know exactly what they did, and I'm going to prove it.
Before we move on, I got to ask you a couple of things before we talk about the grenades with no DNA evidence on them, the supposedly classified documents that you had in your possession. You know, are you afraid for your life?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a trick question. Am I afraid for my life? No, I'm not afraid for my life. I've spent my entire life in a profession where I knew that I could likely die for what my job was, for what I was fighting for. Do I think that they'll try to kill me? Eventually. I mean, I don't know. It depends. It depends. If too many of you start to actually listen to what I have to say, and it becomes apparent that just think, remember, and we'll get to this as we continue, because there's still a lot even before the September arrest that is going to hopefully paint the picture that what government tries to do, right, whenever there's a compromise, what we would refer to in the business as spillage, right? Let's say we have a compartmentalized operation. That compartmentalized operation is built like that, right? You have cover stories, right, or signal reduction, right? Which is basically your backstories. If one layer of the onion is peeled back, well, we've got another lie ready to move forward to fill the gap in hopes that everyone will just finally buy that lie. And you saw this with COVID, right? The initial bullshit story was that it was a bat in a wet market, right? And then the next story was, oh, it was an accidental release, right? And then the next story was, well, maybe it was an intentional release. Maybe China's attacking us. Well, the true story is that, you know, there's plenty of evidence to support this, and the experts have come forward and said, oh, yeah, that strand of research was actually initiated here in the United States at the University of North Carolina under an Obama administration program that was ultimately shut down and then moved from America to the Wuhan lab, right? We know this because the CIA just recently got caught paying their own analysts who weren't read into the compartmentalized operation, who said, yeah, it looks like this, that, or the other thing. And they're like, well, that's way too close to the truth. How about you change your story and we'll buy you a brand new car or give you a nice Christmas bonus or whatever, right? I mean, these are all indicators of something more nefarious going on. But see, compartmentalized operations are designed so that you'll never actually have all the pieces on the same of the puzzle on the same table in order to get 100% verification. But what you need to know is that what they're telling you is a lie. And when someone is lying to you, the next question is, why are they lying to us? What are they hiding, right? And this is the nature of these types of operations. And the best way to defend these types of spillages are, oh, yeah, oh, so this is a big conspiracy theory, right? How did it happen? What's every single detail? Well, no one's ever going to have every single detail. And so it's an automatic defense mechanism that they can simply always throw out. Oh, you're just a conspiracy theory, which brings me to my next example. So January 6th happens. The government has claimed that all the Oath Keepers, to include myself, were at Olive Garden. But, of course, this information is from a later, 6 months after the fact, even though Olive Garden has security footage that I'm sure that they've maintained for at least 6 months, which means the FBI could have gone to this Olive Garden in February or March, well within the 6 month period, and somehow they just didn't know about it, even though they're tracking everyone's cell phones, everyone's bank account, They have arrested everyone. Everyone was asked what they did, where they knew about this Olive Garden dinner probably on January 8th. But yet they don't go to Olive Garden until 6 months after the fact. So meanwhile, they place me at the Olive Garden, and yet they know that I'm not at the Olive Garden. Why? Because they tracked my cell phone. The agent is literally having a conversation with me. I'm telling the agent, and I have the screenshot of our conversation back and forth, where I show the agent the murder of Ashley Babbitt by Lieutenant Michael Byrd of the Capitol Police Department. The video shows that Michael Byrd clearly fires into a crowd of Capitol Police tactical officers, clearly in the frame, right? Everyone's seen the video. At least I hope everyone's seen the video. The agent hadn't seen the video until I sent it to him on the night of January 7th. And I said, here, if you want a contact report from me, which is what you would refer to a report from a human asset, a contact report, here's my contact report. A Capitol Police officer murders an unarmed female Air Force veteran. And you know what the agent's response is on the morning of January 8th? Wow, they were downrange. I have the screenshot. It was in my discovery. So while in June, the FBI is claiming that I'm at Olive Garden the night of January 6th, they really know that I'm actually talking to the Department of Homeland Security investigator working with the Joint Terrorism Task Force that night. Well, we don't flee the D.C. area. We stay like a day or two, and then on our way back, I drive to North Carolina. I visit with my family and friends. On January 13th, the National Terrorism Operations Center closes their assessment on Jeremy Michael Brown, finding that I am no national security threat. And they've analyzed social media. They've done all these things. This is on January 13th. They're already starting to investigate all the people that I was with, people they know I was with, right? They've had conversations with me. They tried to recruit me in December. They know exactly who I am. They, by now, certainly know that I was at the hotel picking up my weapons on January 7th, because at this time, they're now arresting January 6ers, or very close to arresting. Most of the guys that I was with were arrested in January and February. Kenny Harrelson was the latest, who was arrested 5 days after I went public on March 10th. So January 13th, the National Terrorism Operations Center clears me as no national security threat. And then oddly, while I'm visiting with my uncle, who just actually passed away this past Sunday, I'm at his house in North Carolina. I get a call from a number I don't recognize, so I answer it, and it is a Washington Post reporter. And he says, Mr. Brown, I've written an article about your attendance at January 6th, and I'd like to get your comments on it. And I said, well, who are you with again? Oh, I'm with the Washington Post. I said, well, I don't talk to news reporters, and I hang up. He then sends me a threatening text message and says, well, I mean, this article, it doesn't look very good for you. It certainly would not be good. I mean, I'm sure that the text message is still on my phone that the FBI has. But he basically says, this article doesn't look very good on you, and if we have to run it without your comment, it's not going to be a good thing. I don't respond. So on January 15th, the Washington Post runs an article, titled something about how combat veterans are susceptible to conspiracy theories, right? But the article is about me by name, Jeremy Michael Brown. And they write about me, and then they use 3 other examples of combat vets that were part of January 6th, that were there on January 6th, and then they close out the article about me. In essence, the Washington Post, a nationally circulated Washington-based newspaper, actually globally circulated. I mean, Washington Post is a big, hairy deal, right? And owned by Amazon, it certainly has no nexus to the federal government at all. In fact, it's not like the special agent in charge of my actual investigation is married to an Amazon executive. Not at all, right? But the Washington Post somehow in 7 days not only discovered that Jeremy Michael Brown, some guy from Tampa, Florida, that nobody really knows who the hell I am, somehow found out that I was at January 6th, wrote an entire article about my military career and participation in January 6th, and are ready to publish this article on January 15th. And what is their takeaway? That this guy is a conspiracy theorist. Now, at the time, I'm like, a conspiracy? Or based on what? Right? Well, it might have been based on the fact that the FBI knew on January 15th, on January 13th, on January 5th, on December 9th, that I had recorded their agents attempting to recruit me. They knew, because, of course, they monitor everything that you talk about. They knew that I had Project Veritas. They knew that I had reached out to other journalists and said, hey, I've got a story for you. See, I believe, now, I can't prove this yet, but you ask, why am I going to trial? Oh, because I'm going to find out what communications that the federal agencies have with the Washington Post. Not only in my case, but in any of the cases. Where did all these so-called government leaks come from? How did the Washington Post know who the hell I was? And what did they base my so-called conspiracy theories off of? As of January 15, 2021, I hadn't made any public announcements of any major conspiracy theories that I can recall. But yet the Washington Post saw fit to write an article about how I am a conspiracy theory. See, this is what we call a preemptive attack, right? A preemptive character assassination. Oh, hey, Garrett, you're planning on running for governor of Michigan? Oh, well, that would be a shame that this article about some college girlfriend somehow comes out in your local paper before you even announce.
Oh yeah, yep. When I stood up from the very beginning, when I was organizing that group of 400,000 people, there was a world smear article done on me that I found the cure for COVID. Took everything out of context of what I said on a podcast, several months back. And yeah, that's exactly what they did. They discredited. I was a conspiracy theorist. I was a quack, all that. Yeah, I know exactly what they're willing to do. And
was this before you declared that you were running?
Oh yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Yep.
Why would they smear you out of the blue? Well, they knew that you were having private conversations with probably local Republicans and donors and your friends and your wife or whoever, right? Talking about, I think I might run for governor. Oh, really? Oh, well, as we're illegally monitoring the transmission, hey, do we got anything on this guy? Let's use our J. Edgar Hoover policy of collecting dirt on everybody so that we can use it against them if they don't go along with what we want. See, everyone likes to think and likes to say, oh, the FBI used to be great, but now they're corrupt. No. The FBI has always been corrupt. The FBI was formed by a transgender to collect information on his political enemies to use in his favor. And this is evidenced by the church committee hearings exposing COINTELPRO, which wasn't even exposed by the government, but was exposed by activists who broke into an FBI field office, hoping to find all the dirt on their little tiny organization, and instead found that the FBI had dirt on all of these major people, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, John Kennedy, all this stuff, right? And so you can't avoid it. At that point, the cat's out of the bag, right? And so the church committee basically acknowledges, the COINTELPRO, it not only was an FBI illegal operation, but that the FBI wanted people to know how lawless they were in order to instill fear and intimidation in their political enemies. This is the history of fidelity, bravery, and integrity. It's the Federal Bureau of political intimidation. That is what they are. That is what they always have been. The difference is The war on terrorism gave them all Coyote Brown body armor and short barrel rifles, of which they claim I don't have a right to as a retired Green Beret, but that they're perfectly within their rights to kick down the doors of a school board mom with, right? This is who the FBI is. And even their own agents are telling people. After January 6th, we make our slow trek back to Tampa, right? We make multiple stops along the way. I visit family and friends. I visit my buddy in my hometown who's 25-year law enforcement. And I tell him, hey, there's something wrong with what they're saying happened on January 6th is not true, right? I visit with my mother. I visit with my uncle. But oddly enough, now that I've been in jail for 2 years as part of a domestic terrorism investigation of which they got a warrant and seized all this stuff, none of these people were ever questioned by the FBI. So here, I apparently was part of a seditious conspiracy to unarmed overthrow the United States government on behalf of a far right-wing radical white supremacist, even though there was a Hispanic female, even though there was a black guy in the crowd, even though the protectee that we were protecting was a black female, right? But no, in fact, one of the members was a transgender. Okay? But yet we're the far right, radical, white extremist, white supremacist extremists, right, that tried to overthrow the government. And we know that this Jeremy Brown guy was with them ever since November because we had confidential human sources. We've met with the guy. We had phone calls with him on the morning of January 6th and conversations with him in the evening. In fact, the Washington Post just writes about how this guy was a radical conspiracy theorist. Maybe we should send some investigators to talk to all the people that he immediately reached out to right after this event. But they didn't. Why? Because they know exactly who I am. They know exactly what I know. And they just wanted me to not exist. They wanted me that if I did arise on the scene, they wanted everyone to be like, isn't that the guy that the Washington Post just said was a major conspiracy theorist? Yeah, don't listen to him. Which, to answer your very early question, why hasn't your story been picked up by any national voices? Good question. Maybe they're being told by their little minions, their little whisper campaigns throughout the controlled corporate government-controlled media infrastructure that, that guy, he's a total loony bin, right? I mean, sure, he was in special forces for 20 years, held a top-secret clearance and all this other stuff. Yeah, I mean, he ran for U.S. Congress. He ran for Florida State House of Representatives. He owned his own small business. He was a military contractor for Booz Allen Hamilton as an instructor at the Joint Special Operations University. But see, clearly, he's crazy, right? This is how a whisper campaign works. And so there was no interest in my friends. In fact, no effort by the FBI to investigate this so-called co-conspirator in this grand seditious conspiracy. But yet they use the evidence in their trumped-up arrest in other Oath Keeper cases to point to, look at this guy. He had explosives. He had an arsenal of weapons. He had an RV that he called Ground Force One. Or what the hell does that have to do with anything? It's all fantasy. And yet, to this day, Garrett, not one single law enforcement officer of any shape, size, color, race, creed, religion has ever asked me a single question about my involvement in January 6th. Despite their domestic terrorism investigation search warrant, despite the fact that their mythical arsenal that they found, despite the fact that they conveniently found grenades that didn't have any DNA evidence on them, all of these things that would totally support their false narrative, but yet they never came to question me. Do you know that my girlfriend was with me the whole time? In fact, she stayed in the RV on January 6th for the simple reason that they didn't have enough bathrooms, and she didn't want to have to go to porta potties. So she stayed in the RV. No agent ever asked her a single question, so even though she was there the whole 5.5 hours of the search warrant.
That's nuts. So let me just again explain to the audience. So not one law enforcement officer, not one FBI agent ever even sat you down, hey, brought you down to the station, hey, we need to discuss this and that, or what happened with the stuff that happened on January 6th prior and before and after? They not one?
Nope.
Did they ever even read you your Miranda rights?
No, they did not. In fact, that's all caught on video. The entire arrest, because like I said, I had 14 security cameras, of which they attempted to unplug as fast as possible. And so a lot of their actions are not caught on security camera because they violated my property rights by disabling my security cameras without a warrant in order to cover up. See, my girlfriend recorded the arrest on her phone at the very early moments. And all of the moments where they put me in cuffs, load me in the vehicle, and then attempt to gain access to our house and all, never are they caught. Or did they ever Mirandize me? I know what my rights are, and I know what Miranda is. And they never read me my rights. They never advised me to be silent. They attempted to dupe me into unlocking my cell phone by pretending that they had it, which they had not had it, because, see, we have that all those moments on security camera, right? The agent violates the search. The search warrant specifically states you are not to ask for the person to unlock the phone, right? That's what the search warrant literally lays out, states clearly. And yet the agent's like, hey, we have a warrant. You got to unlock your phone. And I say, no, I don't have to unlock my phone. I don't have to say anything, right? No, we have a warrant, right? So he violates the very search warrant, which is already illegal on its face, but then further violates it by attempting to pretend like he has my phone and telling me that that I need to give him my passcode, of which you do not have to do, by the way. You should always ask for a warrant for everything. Never talk to a federal law enforcement agent, no matter how pretty they are or how nice they treat you. Do not talk to a federal agent without a warrant and a lawyer present. But see, when my girlfriend is recording all this, she keeps reminding them, you guys are violating your oath. And the agent says, I'm not going to say anything while I'm being recorded. Well, why? Aren't you operating under the law? Aren't you on the up and up? I mean, aren't you doing everything by the book? Why would you be afraid to be recorded in anything that you say? You're a sworn agent of the law. But yet, all that's called on videotape, right? And see, here's the interesting aspect. My misdemeanor arrest warrant was signed by one judge, but the search warrant was then taken to another judge at the end of the day, right? Because, see, we don't want the arrest warrant judge to know that we're also getting this bogus domestic terrorism search warrant. Also, they were both under seal. Now, the only reason the government can justify for putting a warrant under a seal is because they believe that you're a flight risk. But see, this was 9 months after January 6th, right? I had been publicly, I had done probably 100 interviews at the time. I had been on InfoWars, in studio. I wasn't hiding from anybody. I was trying to tell as many people as possible everything I knew about January 6th at the time. And the government told the judge, we need to seal all of this information from the American public because Mr. Brown is a flight risk. He doesn't want to have to face these very harsh misdemeanors, right? Again, just another attempt to hide the fact that I exist. But see, up until Darren Beattie released that article that we spoke about earlier, the FBI showed no interest in me at all, other than monitoring what I was saying on social media. I have all their investigative documentation, which is nothing, just a bunch of illegal database searches that they used to monitor what I was saying. They knew about me going public on March 12th, according to their own documents, and yet never sent anyone to question me. They were provided a sign that I wrote to them because I called them out for violating their oath and said that if they come after me, they better bring a bigger tax package. They had all this information. It was provided by my girlfriend's sister directly to the FBI. They had this in March of 2020, and yet no investigation. But when Darren Beattie's article came out, and then Jim Hall from the Gateway Pundit called me and said, hey, could you comment on this? It sounds a lot like what you were saying is totally backed up by Mr. Beatty's reporting. And I said, yeah, this is exact. The government has two techniques for guys like me: to ignore them into oblivion, which up to that point, June of 2020 or 2021, they had done. They had ignored me into oblivion, even though they had ample connections. Right? Remember, Olive Garden, hotel footage, confidential human source reports, Washington Post, National Terrorism Operations Center assessment, all this stuff. Yet never actually came to question me, never did any investigation into me. But now I start to get more interviews. I start to get more calls. And immediately the FBI reaches out to 4 other oath keepers who had not yet been arrested. And they were all questioned about me, all offered the ability to avoid prosecution if they would just tell us a little bit about Stuart Rhodes and tell us a little bit about this Jeremy Brown guy. In fact, one of these interviewees was asked an awful lot of questions about my RV and what types of weapons I had. In surveillance before the arrest, there were photographs of my RV in locations not on my property. Now, when I look at these photos from a mindset of a much larger covert operation, if I'm an operator that's been tasked with surreptitiously planting, either through an asset or through an actual bunch of operators that are going to pick the lock on an RV, go in and put something, which I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying I don't know exactly what happened. I am saying, 1, those grenades weren't mine. 2, there's no evidence that they were mine. And 3, they obviously got there somehow, right? So I'm looking at this from a perspective of an operational planner. Well, I would say, where's the RV currently located? How is the RV laid out? What types of weapons does Mr. Brown have? Well, these are oddly some of the questions that were asked of this oath keeper, right? Statements made by oath keepers in grand jury testimony that are attributed to another oath keeper, and yet there's no records of that oath keeper actually ever saying them in any type of interrogation or interview. So one oath keeper, a 19-year-old Caleb Berry, who was questioned by a grand jury in July, was asked about Jeremy Brown at this grand jury testimony. So here you have a convened grand jury, and yet no indictment is issued against Jeremy Brown at this grand jury, but yet I'm brought up as somebody who has explosives. Caleb Berry testifies in a grand jury that Kelly Meggs told him I had explosives, but yet there's no FBI 302 attributing those words to Kelly Meggs, one of the original arrested people in, I believe it was early February or late January. So that means that Kelly Meggs was in FBI custody and is the direct originator of information that I possess explosives, not the grenades that they found, but the broad term explosives, as if we don't quite yet know what we're going to find in the RV, right? Because see, any civilian, if they look at 2 grenades, are going to say, those are grenades, because that's what they are. They're not going to say, oh, well, those are explosives. No, that's a broad professional explanation as to them, right? An expert might say, well, those are clearly explosives, a military-grade explosive in the form of an M67 fragmentation grenade. But a civilian, when presented with a picture of them, would refer to them as what they are, grenades, right? Like a civilian doesn't refer to a picture of a gun and say, oh, well, that's a firearm. No, they say that's a pistol, that's a rifle, right? These are some of the minor little nuances that are all indications that there was no investigation of Jeremy Brown. There was a targeting of Jeremy Brown. And when we get back, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other specifics.
All right, buddy. Hey, I want to get I want to get like a final statement from you on what you want to tell the people that are listening. And I want to help you fundraise for your lawsuit, obviously your appeal. So I want to make sure that we get all that.
Okay.
Is there
Yeah,
anything
let
else
me
that
know
you would
whenever
like to,
you're ready.
is there anything else that you want to add before you go into like your final statement?
Yeah, I mean, if you're ready to wrap up, we can certainly do that. I mean, there's a ton more to go, and you know, if you ever want to get some more information, I'll be more than happy to continue. Because look, the reality is that these things are extremely complex and complicated. They have to be by design, otherwise they'd be very easily uncovered and it would never work. And so, you know, my main thing that I want to say to the American people is that you're being lied to because you are the subjects of a military takeover of this country in order to facilitate a much larger global agenda of the elimination of sovereign countries worldwide, right? I mean, this is why you see the infiltration of politicians at the highest levels. I mean, look, it's no coincidence that the Biden administration received all this under-the-table money from China, and then China's spy balloons are allowed to just traverse the country with no problem. Their naval vessels are allowed to penetrate our imaginary, apparently, defenses, right? And we only know about it because the Coast Guard catches them, right? I mean, we should be concerned that the largest other military in the entire world sending naval vessels for the first time in the history of their Navy off the coast of our country, and they're only being discovered by the Coast Guard, or that they're sending spy balloons. I mean, this is all an intentional and deliberate attack against the United States. I mean, look at the fentanyl crisis that we all know that China's behind it. I mean, they don't even deny it. I mean, other generals have been saying for decades that we're at war with the United States, like radical Islamists. They're literally saying we want to destroy everybody, and everyone's like, I think we might be able to negotiate with them. No, that's intentional buffoonery, right? They aren't thinking they're going to be able to negotiate. They're compromised. They're literally, I mean, how many billions of dollars has the government provided Iran in cash? How many plane loads of cash have we flown into Iran? How many attempts to ensure Iran is able to develop nuclear weapons as our government is responsible for? And yet here we are clamoring that we got to go to war with Iran. It's like, we created Iran. Iran is only able to do what they're doing because we allow them to violate our own sanctions. I mean, it's a big, huge game, right? And this game is being played by those who hate nation states while they develop the European Union, right? They love unions because at the unions, they can simply appoint their favorite political friends who have been brought up under the auspices of the World Economic Forum's Future Leader Award winner, like Trudeau and all of these other clowns, right? I mean, this is what they want. And no matter what perspective you look at it, maybe you look at it as a conspiracy theorist and you think it's this group or that group, or maybe you look at it as a Christian, right? And you read the book of Revelations, or you read Christ's words about the end times. They all align because it's all the same observations, just different conclusions.
So what can we do as Americans? For all the listeners out there, what can we do to fight up against this? I mean, what would you suggest we do?
Well, what I suggest that we do is utilize every tool available to us, local and state governments, our ability to cripple them financially by not doing business with them, the calling out these tiny little despots at these local levels who develop these unconstitutional laws and statutes and say, no, I'm not going to do that, right? I mean, look at the recent resurgence of COVID, right? We received information through a whistleblower from the TSA that the government was planning on artificially reinstating COVID restrictions at the end of October. We received this information in like August or September. But that's odd. How are we supposed to know that there's going to be a viral outbreak 2 months from now, right? Well, the American people discovered this through the brave acts of a whistleblower who said, that doesn't make any sense. We called out the government, and what happened? There was no resurgence of COVID at the end of October. I mean, in California, they still did it because clearly there's enough stupid people in California to go along with it. But everyone else was like, I'm not going to do that. And see, this is the lesson you could learn by watching the movie V for Vendetta, right? No matter how many guns they have, they just don't have the numbers. There's not enough tyrants in this country. There's not enough radical Marxist, communist, globalists in America. Even if they had all the guns and we had no guns, we still outnumber them by so large a margin that we could just stomp their guts out. Yeah, sure, some people would get machine gunned down in the front lines, right? But see, they know this. They know they don't have the numbers. This is why they rely on propaganda. This is why they rely on their lies. This is why they rely on controlling the upper levels of everything, whether it's corporations, whether it's education, whether it's industry, right? This is their power. This is why the constant drumbeat of why they have to take away your ability to defend yourself, because they don't have the numbers. We do. All we have to do is exercise our own personal, individual sovereignty, our own community sovereignty, our own state sovereignty. We need to be getting our state legislatures, right, who act like they're the JV team when really state legislatures formed the federal government. The federal government has no authority without the state's agreement to it. So we need to be leveraging these state legislatures and these state attorney generals to say, no, we're not going to do that. And some of them have, right? Missouri has stood up. Louisiana has stood up. Texas, to an extent, has stood up. But we need to understand what this government was meant to operate like.
And Jeremy,
we just don't.
Can I interrupt you? I got an important question I want to ask you. So if we start getting the momentum at the local level, at the, the state rep level, you start getting the majority of the states to say, you know what, no more. Do you think they're willing to start World War III to eradicate the rest of us so they can keep control?
Oh no, they're going to start World War III before we get to that point. See, look, you don't think that it's a coincidence, right, that Israel is the only thing you hear of. Whatever happened to Ukraine? Well, see, Ukraine only worked for a little bit of time, and then we started to start asking a lot of questions, and then we had to develop some other new distraction. So you're on to something, but here's the thing, is that they always do these things preemptively, right? Deception, distraction, division are how they keep us from fighting them. And so before we get to the point, they will start World War III. They're working on it right now. I have talked about this on my podcast, is that they are spoiling for the Pearl Harbor excuse to just launch their next round in this World War, right? Russia, everyone lost interest in that, so now you never hear about Russia or Ukraine. But now it's Iran. And yet, almost 60 attacks against U.S. military members in the region by Iran. They're literally setting it up. But see, here's the thing. Iran hasn't killed anybody yet, right? They're waiting for that moment where a U.S. service member or a bunch of U.S. service members die, and then that, they believe, will be the Pearl Harbor moment. We've got to bomb Iran. We know that they've wanted to take over Lebanon and Iran for years because Wesley Clark exposed that there were 7 countries in the Middle East that they wanted to take out, and those are the only 2 left, Lebanon and Iran. Just happen to be the 2 countries that they're currently holding off from taking because, see, the American people haven't said in large enough numbers. They're not going along with their scheme. And so they want to really kick it off, but they just can't. And that's why they're just going to allow American troops to be put out there as decoys and keep getting traumatic brain injury and keep getting these attacks. And not do, they're trying to make the Americans beg for war. And yet we're just not doing it. And so you're right. I mean, look, war is always used as a great distraction. I mean, Orwell wrote about the use of war as a great distraction in 1984. And even talk about like, wait, the enemy keeps switching sides. I thought we were on their side. But no, it doesn't matter. Whatever we tell you, whoever we tell you the bad guy is, right? Remember, Russia was our ally in just World War II. Germany was the bad guy, but now Germany is the bad guy. I mean, they simply just bounce this stuff all around and they put it in a nice, pretty narrative, right? Like, oh, Hamas are Nazis. Well, yeah, but what about the Azov battalion in Ukraine? They're also Nazis, and that's not some conservative conspiracy theory bag. That's the New York Times reporting about the Ukraine battalions. Nazis.
Jeremy,
right?
we have a few more
and here's
minutes.
the reality.
We have a few more
the Nazis
minutes.
are everywhere.
What would you like to say to the audience? You have a few more minutes, and then after we're done here, I'm going to put a shout out for everyone to donate to your defense fund, brother. So you got 2 minutes. What would you like to say to the audience?
You have to realize what is going on, right? You live in a world ruled by deception, distraction, and division. And the reason I'm fighting my case in the way that I am is to expose this deception, to expose that the judicial system that you've seen on television shows and in movies is not the judicial system that you will face when they someday come for you. And they will. Just read Martin Niemeyer's poem. They always come for everyone. I'm trying to expose as much as I can. And I'm trying to use their own words against them. I'm trying to use their own system against them because, see, the best way to expose that the system is broken is put it to the test. Let yourself be affected by it and get it on the record. And then I can make the case to the American people. This is what I'm doing, and it takes resources, and it takes time. And I'm willing, look, I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God, right? I took an oath when I was 17 years old. I spent 20 years at the highest levels I could achieve possible in the United States military to defend this country, to defend the American people. I'm not about to just give up on that simply because it's the FBI today that's the enemy rather than Al-Qaeda or ISIS, right? I see what they're doing, and what they're doing is wrong, and they're not going to get away with it. Look, Brandon named my release of that interview Green Beret versus the FBI, which I thought was funny at the time, but that is exactly what it has turned into over the last 2.5 years that I've been fighting this battle, right? And I'm going to continue to fight it because it's all that I know to do, because I see what they're doing. It's wrong. And the American people, they can believe it or not believe it. But it doesn't matter if you believe that that other person over there wants to kill you. When they come to kill you, they're going to do it. When they come to arrest you, they're going to do it whether you believe it or not. And so we need to wake up and come together as a country and fight this tyranny.
We appreciate you, Jeremy. We're going to have you back on the show here in the next couple of weeks, brother. God bless you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Barrett.
You betcha, sir. If you were able to get through all of that footage, you're probably like where I'm at right now, concerned, scared, what to do. Can we really make a difference? And that's one thing that you all have taught me, is the power of one can lead to the power of many. You never know a small act that you may say or do, a conversation that you may have, a phone call that you may take, that may literally change the lives of millions tomorrow. And that was the whole point of this interview, to bring this awakening to all of you so you can continue to stand up. And I'm hoping all of you that are watching, that this throws gasoline on the fire of liberty and the fire of your heart and the fire of your own soul to continue to stand up to what we're against, because it's going to take all of us together as the American people to stand up against this evil that is in front of us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our Normandy moment. This is our World War II event. You must rise to the occasion. You can no longer sit on the sidelines. You can no longer sit in the shadows. You have to get into the fight, no matter how old, how young you are. It is time for all of us to rise up together and continue to take back lost ground. We're no longer holding the ground, folks. We're taking back lost ground now. So I urge all of you, if something inside you gives you that fire to run for office, any level of office, run. If it gives you the fire to get involved in your local elections, it gives you the fire to get back good patriotic Americans who are running for office, then you must do so. You can no longer put your head in the sand any longer, because that story right there, that's going to give me what I need to continue my fight and what we're trying to do. And I will do everything I can to bring you up-to-date, accurate, and truthful information. So God bless you. God bless the state of Michigan, of course, and always. God bless these United States.